Without a doubt, id Software has made a huge impact on the gaming world, but not just through their games, but also through their game engines that would go on to power many other influential games. Now, there is one company in particular that has made extensive use of id Software game engines, and that company is Raven Software. And throughout the years, they have put out many exemplary titles.
Raven Software was, and still is, a pretty good developer, and they always used to use id Software game engines, and essentially this is how it used to go. id Software would create a new game engine, they'd create a tech demo that would masquerade as a game, and usually that tech demo was pretty good, and then Raven Software would get their hands on the engine and then actually turn out a game with a plot and characters. And generally the gameplay was more advanced than just shoot everything in sight. In many respects, they are like Obsidian Software. They take a solid game or engine made by a more well-known company and then turn out a game that is more polished and deeper. Now, Raven Software has put out many well-made games throughout the years. You have the Heretic and Hexen series, Soldier of Fortune, Jedi Knight. The list just goes on and on.
Raven Software really was the very first company to create a wholly new game using the Doom engine. And that game was Heretic. Now, Heretic was my first exposure to fantasy, and you know what? Surprisingly, I rather liked it. So now, let's take a look at this first-person shooter masterpiece.
Now, at its most basic level, Heretic is completely identical to Doom. You kill, you find keys, and then you find an exit. But the game did improve upon Doom in many respects. For one, you now had the ability to look up and down, you had an inventory system, you had an inventory item that allowed you to fly up and down, you had secondary fire modes that were accessed by finding an inventory item known as the Tome of Power. Furthermore, the environments were much more detailed than the one seen in Doom, along with new environmental effects such as scrolling pathways in the water with currents. There were also a few minor details added to the world as well, such as some switches that will have cobwebs on them. The levels were also much larger and had much more to do in them. The enemies also had more details to them as well, such as the little gray bits on the mummy. Also, when you kill the mummy, a ghost will fly out of its bloodied remains. The weapons also look much more detailed than the ones in Doom, a good example of which is the animated crossbow bolt in the ethereal crossbow. The sound for the game, for the time, was amazing. There were all kinds of spooky ambient sounds, such as chains rattling and evil laughter. Also in this game, the enemies actually sounded threatening.
Now, there was one ambient sound that was really frightening to me. I mean, it literally gave me nightmares. Just listen. Even to this day, that creeps me out. I mean, it sounds like it's coming from nowhere at all. But once you find that enemy making it, well, it dies just like anything else.
The music for the game, like many early 90s games, is great all around, and the soundtracks really do pump you up to kill things and set the mood quite well. Here's a bit from the first level. For a fantasy game, that's rockin' to say the least. The game also has a few original touches here and there, like the difficulty settings. Rather than be boring, Raven used medieval-esque wording. And while the Black Plague does not possess thee, I am indeed a smite meister. One final awesome note is the fact that the player character laughs when you pick up a new weapon. And at the time, voice in games was pretty rare, so for such a small detail to be put into a game is actually fairly significant. In fact, of the many FPSs of the 90s, this was pretty much the only game to include an auditory exclamation of joy at finding a new weapon.
Now, unlike with Doom, this game actually has a named main character and a named main villain and an actual story? See the difference between a tech demo and a game?
In the game, you play as Corvus, a kick-ass elf who is on a quest to take down one of the 3 Serpent riders, powerful magical beings that have corrupted a number of universes. In this game, you are going after Desperal, the weakest of the lot. Now, the other Serpent riders would indeed be fought in later games.
Despite all of these great story elements, Heretic suffers from the same exact problem that all early 90s FPSs suffered from. The story doesn't come up in the game, unless you count the text screens at the end of each episode. When you start up Heretic, it happens just like when you start up Doom. You get no story at all. Really, it wasn't until Dark Forces that we actually got, plots and things of that nature. In this game, at least, we have a rudimentary plot other than just kill all demons and fight hell. But still, it's pretty basic, but it does show some evolution. And so moving on from the story, let's take a look at the weapons and enemies.
It has been said in the past that this is medieval Doom, and those people who stated this would be right. The majority of the weapons do indeed correspond to the Doom ones. The wand is the pistol, it's weak, and takes numerous hits to kill anything. The ethereal crossbow is the shotgun, and is used pretty much throughout the game as your main weapon. Also, since I'm a Star Wars fan, I would like to point out that this weapon is pretty much a bowcaster, and so when you have to fight a massive group of enemies, just give a loud Wookiee roar and charge! And then there is the Dragon Claw, which of course is the chain gun. And I personally really like the sound effects for this weapon. It just has such a deep metallic sound, and it really makes it feel like there is some real force behind it. Then there is the Hellstaff, which of course is the plasma rifle, and this is really the most useful heavy weapon in the game because its ammo is very easy to find, and you can carry a lot of it. Now the game has roughly 2 BFGs. It has the Phoenix Rod. That, rather than being a BFG analog, it's more like a rocket launcher analog in all reality. It doesn't do that much damage, its ammo is really not that plentiful, and its secondary fire isn't even all that good. The secondary fire is actually some sort of flamethrower effect, which is kind of notable if only because this is probably the first time you ever got to use a flamethrower in an FPS. And then you have the Fire Mace, which fails on all accounts. It's more like another chain gun more than anything else, and to make matters worse, it can't hurt spectral enemies. Why would you even include this weapon? Moving on, you then have 2 melee weapons. You have the awesome Gauntlets of the Necromancer, which shoot out green, or if powered up, red electricity. This, of course, is the chainsaw of the game, and it is awesome. And then finally, there is my personal favorite, the staff. You see, back in the 90s, I loved quarterstaffs. My grandfather and I both used to make them. And then, of course, the forested area where we got the wood was demolished to build a housing addition. Time marches on indeed. Anyway, I loved being able to kill enemies with a quarterstaff, since it does look pretty damn awesome, especially when it's powered up and has that blue electricity on it. And now on to the enemies that must be obliterated. The Firebat is the first enemy that you must slaughter. And as a low-level enemy, this thing is far more dangerous and advanced than the Zombie Man from Doom. It can fly, for one, and can attack from several different planes because of it. And there's also an upgraded one that has a fire attack. Then there are the mummies, which take a lot more punishment and, when killed, release a ghost, which I always found to be a very nice touch. Then there is the upgraded form that fires off a homing fireball that has a face! Then you have the witch doctors who throw axes, and the upgraded version of these guys are not all that interesting because all they do is just fire red axes. Enemies also can come in a spectral form where they take more damage and can, in theory, only be harmed by certain types of weapons. You then have the most frightening enemy in the game. Ugh. This is the Disciple of Desperal, but I always just called him the guy. Essentially, that was the closest I could get to replicating the sounds back in the day. These guys are basically evil mages that have a pretty devastating ranged attack and can take a huge amount of damage.
Okay, going off topic for a minute. Back in the dark and dusty era of the 90s, when the internet was just a fever dream, many people, myself included, would just sort of come up with their own names for various enemies. And I feel that allowed you to use your own imagination somewhat more than we get today. I mean, today, you want to look up an enemy, you just type in that wiki for whatever game it is. You type in the Fear wiki and you can know exactly what Replica Soldier 196 is and what it does and all its stats. But back in the 90s, you didn't know. You saw a flying enemy that was red, and it kind of looked like a bat, and so you called it a fire bat. It just made the games more personal, I think. Okay, enough waxing nostalgic and philosophic.
One final thing to note is the fact that there are numerous items to find in the game, and they all have pretty clever names. Like the bomb is not just called a bomb, it's called the Time Bomb of the Ancients. And instead of a backpack full of ammo, you instead have the Bag of Holding. The most useful item outside of the Tome of Power is the Quartz Flask, which is a portable medkit. And you see, the game gets harder and harder and harder as time goes on, and so the flask goes a long way towards keeping you alive.
Now, as one would expect, Heretic was lauded as groundbreaking and received numerous accolades at the time of its release, and it deserved every one of them, because it did things that no other game even dreamed of doing.
Getting this game to run on a modern PC is simplicity itself. You just need to get either Z-Doom or Skulltag. One interesting thing to note is the fact that there is a 3D mod for this game, and damn does it look good, and is definitely worth checking out. Because the graphics do look rather good, and the modders did a great job taking a 2D game and making it 3D. My only complaint is the mummies. They just fall down and split open rather than turning to bloodied rags. But overall, for a mod, this is a very well done graphical update.
Heretic would receive a direct sequel called Hexen Beyond Heretic, and it was indeed beyond Heretic. It basically improved upon every conceivable attribute. And then a few years later, there would be a Heretic 2 for some reason, even though Hexen already was a direct sequel. Well, you know what? Heretic's good enough to warrant 2 direct sequels. And if anybody asks, an elf wizard did it with mind bullets!